Just go. Do you want to go? So good morning, everybody. I am so glad to be here with you guys this morning. My name is Dr. Molly Wasco. I'm a professor over in the Collat School of Business. And today I want to talk about three things. So first of all, I want to talk about why does translational science matter? The second thing is how do you become a translational thinker? And then third, where does your science go from here? And I just want to tell you, these views that I'm about to express are solely my own and not representative of the CCTS. But I've been working with the CCTS for about the past 7 years. And so what I'm going to talk about today is really the evolution in my thinking, in my experiences with working with the CCTS. So if what I say you think is totally off the mark and completely irrelevant and doesn't represent translational science very well, that's entirely my fault. But hopefully, by telling my story of how I've engaged with the CCTS, at least everybody will be able to walk away with something that hopefully will be valuable. So my area of expertise is organizational innovation. So specifically, I like looking at how information and communication technologies help transform organizations and help them innovate better, faster. And this is a model. I didn't come up with this model, but I find it very compelling. This was created by an organizational researcher named Simon Sinek. And he was really interested in looking at why is it that some organizations are better at outperforming their competition consistently over time. So he wanted to know why is it that companies like Apple are able to outperform their competitors that have fallen by the wayside. So competitors like HP or Dell. And what he discovered in doing this research was that most organizations were very good at actually describing what do they do. So when you ask somebody, so what does your organization do? They can say, we sell computers. So when you look at UAB, what do we actually do? Well, we're an institute of higher education, right? We educate and train students. And then a lot of organizations can actually say how they do that. So what is their secret sauce? How do we do what we do? So if you look at UAB, once again, how many of you guys have read our new strategic plan? So who has a device open and can Google UAB strategic plan real quick? Anybody? All right. Did you get there? Okay, what's our mission?
I see the strategic objectives.
Is it the first paragraph at the top?
Interesting. So they don't have the mission completely stated, but we do have, all right, go down through the pillars. Okay, so education, research innovation, community engagement, and patient care. So this is how we do it. So what do? We're an institute of higher education. How do we do it? Through education, research, community engagement, and patient care. But where does it say, why do we do it? What is our purpose? Why do we do research? Why do we educate students? Why do we engage in patient care? Well, it's because we want to make more money, right? We want to get that next R1 to bring in more research grants. We want to bring in more students so we have more education dollars. We want to grow. Well, unfortunately, this is what happens to companies that aren't able to reach that level of success. They have a very hard time actually articulating why. What is their purpose? Why does our organization exist? And so what Simon has discovered is organizations that actually start by talking about why are far more successful. So why does UAB exist? Well, in my opinion, we exist to eradicate the suffering in our region related to social, economic, and health issues. And we do that through education, research, community engagement, and patient care. And what do? We're an institute of higher education and an academic medical center. Want to join us? So those organizations that start with why and understand their purpose are far more successful than just saying, hey, we're an institution of higher education. Want to come here? And the reason is because when you connect with somebody around a purpose, that's an emotional connection. And it's a different part of your brain. And so what and how connects to the rational part of our brain. And it's very, very hard to convince somebody with a rational argument. But boy, if you can connect with them on an emotional level, the emotional part of your brain will talk your rational brain into doing anything. And so finding a way to connect with the why is critically important. That's what people find compelling. And so by taking this model, what is translational science? Who knows? You've been sitting in this class how many months? Mm-hmm. What is translational science?
I would just say taking the research findings that we have and making them applicable into more like, I guess, real world settings or just kind of within a community or maybe a healthcare setting, something that, we have this information, we have this knowledge, and we're able to actually like take it and utilize it to disseminate that information in a meaningful way.
Okay. Anyone else? Want to add to that? So essentially, that is the idea. And the idea behind the CCTS, Translational Science. It is about how do we accelerate the pace of discovery. And when we look at how we do science, we actually have these different phases or buckets in which we do our science. So we have the T1, your basic scientific discovery, and then how do you get that the findings that you have in your lab, toss it over the fence into that next phase of clinical insight. How do you translate what you have discovered in your lab into something that is relevant to somebody next down on the spectrum? And so we talk about T1, T2, T3, T4, and this is incredibly difficult. So knowledge is something that is very, very sticky. That it happens, it's discovered in a lab, but getting that knowledge to actually move out of your lab and into the next phase is incredibly difficult. And so while you may be coming up with insights in your own lab, they don't actually turn into impact as long as it stays right there in the room with you. And so the purpose, what do we do at the CCTS, is how do we accelerate the translation of your ideas from one phase to another? All right, who knows how we actually do it?
Collaboration between different areas of research and the pathway to implement them.
And what is our buzzword for talking about collaboration right now?
Team science.
Team science! Hallelujah, absolutely. It happens in teams. How else do we do it?
Publications.
Through publications.
Community engagement.
Community engagement. So how many of you guys have seen the model of the CCTS and the different services we provide? All right, so yeah, this is how we do it. So we provide help with grants, we provide funding opportunities, pilots, project panels, biostats, informatics, research data, mini sabbaticals, drug discovery. So this is how we actually do it. And so when I came to the CCTS, once again, I'm coming out of business, I have a very different perspective of this. I look at, all right, so here we are on the right side, academic medical center. We have about $500 million coming into this institution every single year. I see that as an R&D investment. What do we actually have, though, that is translating across this final campus boundary and actually impacting communities? And so I was really curious that in looking at all of the services we provide, where in the heck is this idea of translating off of campus and into some type of commercial venture? And so, here we have, we're an amazing center of innovation. But how do we actually get that out of our campus to actually impact communities through commercialization? So for the past 3 years, I've been working on a project called AICore. And so AICore is a program. It's about commercialization. It's about entrepreneurship to help academic researchers actually discover the economic potential of the research that they're doing. It's a program that was developed by NSF, and it was in response to, they wanted more funding from Congress. And what do you think Congress said to them? Well, what the heck have you done with the money we've given you? Where's the impact? Can you show us what's actually come out of the research we've already invested in? And so they went through their portfolio, and what they discovered was we don't have any programs in place to help these discoveries actually turn into commercial ventures and have impact in the communities. So they developed this program called AICore. And, when you look at the investments that we have in science, they're pretty big. So NSF is $7 billion. Do you guys know what NIH funding is?
Say that again, please.
NIH, how much NIH funds in research every year? So this is NSF. They're tiny. NIH actually funds $30 billion. And so going back to this, they put AICore in place, NSF did, about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And it's been incredibly successful. So they've trained about 1,000 teams. Each team gets $50,000 to go through this process of, discovering the commercial potential. And about 30% of the ideas that have come through have actually gone on to create companies. And so NIH has started to pay attention to this, and they said, well, let's do an NIH AICore. So for the past year, I've been working with the team to actually take the curriculum from NSF and port it over to NIH. Right now, the only way that you can actually go through AICore with NIH is if you already have an SBIR. You already have to be a company. And so far, we've probably trained about 150 different teams, SBIRs, taking them through the program. And so here's how the program actually works. That we used to think that entrepreneurship was about, all right, you have, really smart people, you have a really awesome idea, you just, give them a ton of money. So, I'm just going to go get venture capital. And then some time goes by and then voila, a company is created. Well, that doesn't work. And so startups are not smaller versions of companies. Startups have to go through a completely different set of processes. Companies already know what their business model is and they execute on it. Startups are actually searching for a business model, which creates, they have to do different things. And that search for the business model is a very windy road. And so here's a case in point. So this is a team, it's called Team Spion, that came out of Auburn. So, I did a workshop on what is AICore. This team's like, oh yes, we have this great idea. We can't wait to commercialize it. So this is Alan Dennis. And he's got such cool science. I mean, the science is so cool, I don't even understand the abstract. It's about nanocomposites, self-assembling nanomaterials particles that turn into theranostics. And so the first thing we do in AICore is we make you say, what is your value proposition? So we actually have the scientists come up with just very simple answers to these 3 questions. Who is your customer? What is your product? And why do they care? And so these guys, My product is, actually, it turns out it's an MRI contrast agent. So we got them to say that, and they said, well, it's an MRI contrast agent, and it's better. All right, what does better mean? Is it faster? Is it cheaper? Is it lower cost? Is it higher quality? And so version 2.0 of this was, well, okay, who's my customer? An MRI center. An MRI center wants a contrast agent because it yields higher quality results. Well, MRI centers are actually buildings. They're not people. And so who are the people, who are the customers, the beneficiaries that actually care enough about this problem that they're willing to change the way they do things now and write you a check? So then they were like, okay, radiologists. Radiologists want contrast agents that yield higher quality results. So one of the things that we do at AICore, that is a testable hypothesis, isn't it? So basically, we take the scientific method and we apply it to startups. How do you collect data to test that hypothesis? PubMed? Google search? How do you collect that data? You have to actually go talk to radiologists. So we made them get out of their lab and actually go talk to 30 radiologists to test that very basic hypothesis. Do you care about contrast agents that yield higher quality results? Guess what they found out? They didn't care about that at all. Radiologists are like, that's not our problem. That the pictures we get are good enough to be able to do the job that we need to do. Guess what kept up radiologists at night thinking about?
Missing a diagnosis.
Actually, it was the safety. So injecting people with the contrast agents that we currently have is actually poisoning them. And some of their patients can't even process the dye. So what they were really interested in was, how do we actually create a contrast agent that is safer for patients? And so, of course, they're like, we're working on the wrong problem. But at least they were able to test that hypothesis. So the second thing that we do in AICore is we use a tool called the business model canvas. So every single business model consists of these 9 boxes. And so what we do, the 2 boxes, what's your value proposition, who's your customer? So we did that. But then we actually make them go through, all right, how would you actually reach that customer? How do you maintain a relationship? What kind of revenue stream are you going to need to be able to do that? So kind of your forward facing. What are the things that happen on the front end? But then what are the back end things you need to do? So what are the key activities? So do you need to get FDA approval? How long will that take? Do you need to hire specific types of research scientists? And so we bring them through, like, this is how you use a business model canvas, come up with more hypotheses, and then test them by going and talking to people. How do radiologists actually purchase MRI contrast agents? Do you even know? Do they have decision-making power in that context? And so by taking teams through this process, that by the end of the program, what we've discovered is about 30% of the teams actually are able to figure out a business model, and which is a good thing since they're already companies, right? They're SBIRs, and they're able to execute. 30% success rate is huge in startups. Do you know what the typical success rate of a startup is? Less than 10%. And so this is why it's had an impact. So I would say the other 20% of the teams, they never leave the lab. And so when we tell them that, oh, you're going to have to go talk to 100 people and test some hypothesis, they're like, no, I already know. All I need is money so I can build it. And as soon as I build it, all I need is FDA approval. And then it's going to be a huge commercial success. Not the case. But those teams aren't going to budge. So we're like, that's fine. You haven't learned anything that we've been trying to teach you, but go back to your lab and get your next R1. Perfectly fine outcome. But about 50% of the teams, what they discover is that they're doing the wrong research. So they're doing research that people in the real world don't really care about. And it's incredibly frustrating. And the pain and agony of actually interviewing 100 people, that's not what you guys have been trained to do. It's actually incredibly difficult. But the ones that survive, what I've noticed is they've had this transformation in their thinking, absolute transformation. The skill of just getting out of my lab and testing my hypothesis helps them actually become better scientists. And so the true aha for me, so the CCTS, all the things that we are built around is, are we doing science right? Do you have the right biostats? Do you have the right informatics? Do you have, let's review your pilot to make sure that it's going to yield valid results. But in my opinion, working with the scientists that I have, a key component of this, I've turned the question around. Are we actually doing the right science? And do we know that before we invest 3 years and $1 million into doing something? And so for Alan and his team, so he has an R01. He was able to convince an NIH review panel that this was really valid research. He has 2 doctoral students, and they come home and they're like, oh crap. So, but instead of giving up, they decided, well, we're going to work on safety. We know that is a real problem with real impact in our communities, so we're going to tweak what we're doing, and we're going to actually try and solve that problem. So how do we develop as scientists? This is really the key insight for me. So all of you guys, are somewhere along this spectrum. And then what we do is we try and give you really deep knowledge in your areas. So, we start just pulling apart so we get deeper and deeper into our science, become more internally focused, work with people in our lab, and then we train you to become even deeper thinkers. So you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, but the impact of this is that we're creating these silos. That not only is it hard to get a basic scientist in one lab working in cancer to talk to another basic scientist in diabetes, but this idea that you're going to be able to talk to somebody else along the translational spectrum, that it's never going to happen. And so this is why translational science is so difficult, because the deeper we get into our thinking, the harder it is to actually have a conversation with somebody else. So it even becomes a part of our identity, isn't it? So if somebody asks you, oh, who are you? You will say, hi, I am a basic scientist. Hi, I am a clinical researcher. Hi. I mean, it's just embedded in who we are. Not only that, we become very specialized in our languages. So actually, I had a really good time. I got to read your project descriptions. So they gave this to me. I don't understand any of them. And so, but we think, oh, that's part of our identity. I have this special code that I can talk to other people, and we're the only ones that know what we're talking about. And so, but what happens is it just makes it harder to talk to other people. And without this type of shared connection with somebody else along the spectrum, that knowledge isn't going anywhere. And because I don't understand you, I'm like, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm going to go back to my community that understands me and thinks I'm really, really smart, right? So it's this idea, a doctor, a lawyer, and an engineer walk into a bar and had nothing in common. So don't even try and talk to each other. Actually, engineers are phenomenally annoying, right? Because they're just left brain. I get tired of talking to them after about 10 minutes and just walk out the door. So it makes it more and more difficult to have conversations. All right, so if you want to know what the best predictors of knowledge transfer actually are, here they are. So if we're going to get knowledge to get out of your lab and transfer it to the next place along the spectrum, this is what it's going to take. Who do you know? You are far more likely to share ideas with people you know than total strangers. So you have to have a network of personal connections of people who are different from you. As long as you're hanging out with people who are just like you, you're sharing the same ideas. You have no new information coming into your network to be able to come up with that aha moment. And so who you know matters. You also need to know what those people know. So you don't have to be an expert in everything. You don't have to be an expert at informatics. What you want to know is who in my network actually has that expertise and how do I tap into that? You need to have at least some shared language, because if one of you is talking Italian and one of you is talking German, you're not going to be able, that's kind of an extreme, but you can't communicate. So you need to be able to at least have some shared language to share ideas. Availability, that you have to make yourselves available through things like this, just showing up to this and making yourself available to these colleagues. That's a huge component of it. And then finally, interest and curiosity. So the willingness, even though the engineer is totally annoying, to sit down and try to understand the world from their point of view. And so when you look at this, what we're really trying to do, if you want knowledge to transfer across the spectrum, then we need to develop scientists that actually kind of look horizontally. Not only are they vertically deep in their own science, but have this really unique capability of looking to the left and looking to the right and being able to talk to the people around them. And so I call these people T-shaped scientists. So deep vertically, the vertical line of the T, but then also this ability to look left and the right. And this is, in my opinion, what a translational thinker is. And so when I try to express my ideas about, well, what is a translational thinker? Can I tell you what the characteristics is? I started off with, well, I don't know what it is, but I can recognize it when I see it, right? And so this is a scientist. He's a PhD. His name is Lucio Miele, and he's down at LSU. He's actually part of the executive committee of the CCTS and our partner network. And I've had the pleasure of working with him for about 2 or 3 years now. And so, I go to these CCTS meetings. I'm the only business person there. Everybody else is one of these super smart research scientists. And I can remember I was standing next to Lucio and then another research scientist, and they were talking about their cancer research. And so the third person was going blah, 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 blah. And Lucio so he's doing research on, this part of a tumor, trying to make it shrink using these types of things. And so standing next to Lucio, it was so interesting to me because he interpreted everything that this third guy said. And I'm just like, that is a translational thinker, somebody that understands the technical stuff, but is just as fluent as explaining it to the business school person. And so it's this idea of how do we develop people with these types of skills? And so since I was able to recognize it, I sat down and I thought, all right, so what really is it about Lucio that is so special? And so this is what I was able to come up with. First of all, translational thinkers are human-centered, okay? Problems are felt by people. And so this idea, how well do you understand the people who are suffering with the problems that you're trying to address? All of our science should be human-centered. It should be about the people, not about the problem. And so how much empathy do you have for the people you think you're going to help? Have you ever spent a day walking in their shoes? But the more human-centered we can make the research that we do, the more we're able to translate our ideas. Second thing, radical collaboration. I know working in teams is incredibly frustrating. So it's hard to coordinate, it's hard to talk to each other, it's hard to find time, it's hard to invest. But this idea, if we're going to solve some of our major health issues, these are way too complex for us to tackle on our own. We need to have teams of people with diverse ideas and actually really go through the effort of radical engagement to get to those breakthrough ideas and insights. The third thing is multilingual. So it's this idea of perspective making and perspective taking. So this ability to understand the knowledge of our own communities, of our own research areas, but then again, this ability to take the perspectives of somebody else. Can we get out of our box and actually understand the context of somebody else. Insatiably curious. So this is, asking people, being willing to sit there and listen and constantly asking, why is that important? Why do you do it that way? Why do we have to have a power calculation? Why does my research suck if I don't have it this way? And so it's this idea, begin with a beginner's mindset. Be open to learning new ideas. And then constantly ask why. So this one, it seems incredibly simple, but we refuse to do it, especially as we get more and more expert in our own science. Why do you think? What happens if you ask a question to a colleague and ask why?
You make enemies?
You think you look stupid. The reason you're a highly paid scientific, researcher is because you're the smartest person in the room. And so if you can force yourself to just step back and take on a beginner's mindset, you'll be much more open to learn. But at the same time, it makes you a lot more vulnerable because we're afraid to look stupid. All right, embrace experimentation. Learn fast. How quickly can you learn something? Can you set up tiny little experiments to just push it a little bit forward? So if you're going to fail, you want to fail fast. Failure is not the 4-letter F word, by the way. It's just how we actually learn. So the more that you get out and test your hypotheses and talk to humans to do that, you can do that really, really quickly. It doesn't take years and years and years to wait and watch something grow. So this idea, how can you embrace experimentation and then fail fast and learn from that and keep going? And then a bias towards action. In my opinion, science is a lot about thinking, but it's just as much about doing. And because we don't want to look vulnerable, we're afraid of failure, we want everything to be perfect before we set it loose into the world, right? So I'm not going to submit my K grant yet because it's not perfect. And so we have this, it takes so much longer waiting for perfection. So instead of always thinking, try doing. Just go ahead and get it out there. Go to a panel, get some ideas, put yourself out there, and that's how you'll be able to move forward. All right, so why does translational science matter? I never really got back to that original. So we talked about what it is and how we do it, but why does it really matter for us? Why does it matter? If I'm going to convince you to become a translational thinker, then I've got to connect with you emotionally about why it's relevant.
For me, I think it's relevant because I can see the impact that it has, the applicability, the impact on the individuals and the communities that I'm trying to reach.
Absolutely. So it's this idea, why is translational science important? Because it has an impact on people. Because it helps us eradicate the suffering from the diseases that we have here in our region. We are trying to make people's lives better. What could be more? That's why I get up in the morning. I don't get up because, I'm going to make my next PowerPoint slide. I get up because I believe that by doing what I do, it's going to make a real impact on the people in our region. All right, so coming back to why. So, remember first step in AICore, and this is really difficult. Can you actually create a value proposition around your science? Who is the customer for your science? What is your product, and why do they care? And so it's interesting. I gave an AICore talk to this group about a year ago, where I talked about how great commercialization was. And 90% of you in this room said, not even relevant to me. I don't care. What I'm working on will never be commercialized. It's not my problem to actually figure out. I'm a basic scientist. I don't know how what I'm going to do is actually going to have an impact. Well, so, basically the value proposition was, all right, who's my customer? My customer is NIH. right? What is my product? It's my grant. Why do they care? It's because I found enough citations in PubMed to actually convince a review panel that it's relevant. Well, we've got to do better than that. We've got to do better. So, where does your science go from here? This is one of your projects, and I apologize in advance. I didn't understand the words, and I'm going to butcher it horribly. So, when you talk about your science, tell me about your research. I work on mitochondrial DNA damps, maybe? Bless your heart. What does that mean in the South? Time to walk away, right? So you have just lost even your grandmother. So how do we do better? So here's the secret. Quit talking about the science. Put the science in a box and lock the box. So yes, you can talk about your science in your own community of practice, but when you're trying to translate and talk to other people, just put the science in a box and lock the box. Put the box under the bed. Because here's the thing, that the myth is that your customers or your beneficiaries, I call them customers, but they could be patients, they could be beneficiaries, the people, they don't care about your science. When it comes to why, what people really care about is they want their jobs done. Can you make my job better, faster, more exciting? They want their problems addressed. Can you make this go away for me? They want their dreams realized. Can you make me prettier, faster, thinner? Or they want their pain to go away. That's why people care. And so if you can connect with, what people really think about and need, then it opens up a completely different conversation. So here's the example. Start with why. All right, tell me about your research. I help people regain their well-being and mental health. Wow, that's pretty cool. How do you do that? I do experiments in a university lab, and I use NIH funds to do that. Oh, okay. And then tell me more. I work on mitochondrial DNA damps to help. Is this somebody's project in here? Does anybody recognize it? It's something to do with people with bipolar. So that was the one word I recognized. So you can see it completely changes how people view you and what you're doing, and it gets them excited about it. And so for me, this is the essence of translational thinkers. This idea that having a conversation, solving human-centered problems, working with other people, and then, being insatiably curious. So when we talk about translational science, these are the things that we know translational scientists do. All right, how do I make you do it? Well, I just gave you a lecture, right? Now you're all translational scientists, translational thinkers. So here's the other tricky thing about it is what? So you can sit in a lecture, or you can read a paper or an article. You can do, searches on PubMed, read a grant, and you learn a type of knowledge that we call know what. It's very explicit, very high level. The only way to truly become a translational thinker, though, is by gaining knowledge that we call know how. And this is experiential learning. You learn how to become a translational thinker by actually engaging in these activities to help you develop these capabilities. So you can't just sit in a lecture and automatically become a translational thinker. You actually have to go out and do it. And so you guys in this class, you all have project teams, don't you? Where you have some type of research area, and they actually broke you up specifically to separate you from your community of practice. So you had to actually engage with other people. How are you guys doing? I'm too busy. I've got to get my next, independent K or MIT, or I've got to fund my research. So I'm too busy to engage. And this is why we fall short, is because we're so busy in our daily activities and the things that we're good at that we don't invest the time to actually say, well, I'm going to move this project forward because the experience is going to teach me things that I'm not getting in my lab. And so don't be fooled into thinking that what you're doing now is the only thing you're going to be doing forever. Go ahead and invest the time, the effort to really work on these team projects because you never know. But what I would like you guys to do for your team projects is I want you to start with why. Why are you going to do this? And then talk about how, and then talk about what. But if you can create this shared vision within your group about why what you're doing is really important, then you're much more likely to actually work on it. All right, so just some things I want to leave you guys with, that think about translational thinking. Think about how will your research transfer out of your lab to actually have an impact? Well, who do you know? Have you forced yourself to go out and meet new people? Are you doing different talks on campus? Are you coming to the CCTS forums? Are you taking advantage of these resources? That the broader your network, so people who are more senior than you, people who are more junior than you, people who know informatics, biostatisticians, this idea, the broader your network, then the more knowledge you'll have coming in to make yourself available for. Knowing who knows what, so what is their area of expertise, actually having conversations to develop some sense of a shared language so you can share your ideas, make yourselves available, which is get out of your lab and go talk to people, and then finally this interest curiosity. The AHA's insight for me that I think it's important not only that we're doing science right, because that certainly is, the key. We don't want to be engaged in experiments or scientific designs that yield bad results at the end, or junk, crap. So we have to do science right. But I also want us to think very carefully, are we doing the right science? So assuming your science actually is incredibly successful and you prove your hypothesis, what is the real impact? Who is actually going to take and care about that? And maybe you are a basic scientist. And maybe, the chances of you ever seeing something in a human patient is so far down the line, it's hard to imagine. But I can promise you, unless you start talking to people next to you in the translational spectrum, your science isn't going to leave the lab. How many of you guys have ever, figured out, all right, who's next? Who does research in the next stage that could actually pick up what I'm doing and move it forward? And spend a day with them in a lab and actually discover what are the major problems that you have in your research. And could you possibly help them solve that problem? And so even though you may not see, well, there's a commercial application or it's going to impact human science, I know you can find other scientists along the translational spectrum and start talking to them. Because unless you know exactly who is going to really care about your idea and your science and help you move that forward, then it's just a crapshoot. Someday, maybe somebody will be reading PubMed and my article and it'll have an impact. But boy, wouldn't it be fun to know beforehand? And so one of the things that the CCTS provides is something called a mini sabbatical. Have you guys heard about this? So you know what a sabbatical is. We all hope someday we'll get one, where we have months away to just freely think and go visit. Well, a mini sabbatical is we send you away for a couple of days or a week. So getting you out of our context. So even here at UNB, you believe what I say and you actually go find some colleagues that are on a different area of the spectrum from you, and you discover they have a really big problem. All we've really discovered is that we have this problem here at UAB, right? The next step is, well, I wonder if they have that problem at Vanderbilt or at Mayo or at Johns Hopkins. So can you actually get yourself out of our context and go follow them around a lab in a different context? And if you discover, oh man, they have that problem too. Maybe this is a really big problem that's worth solving. So take advantage of these mini sabbaticals. Once again, looking at knowledge transfer expands who you know, expands who you know that knows what, and it creates a new network. So even though we may discover it's a problem here at UAB, it doesn't mean it's going to be a broad problem. All right, envision the pathway to impact. So how is your idea going to move? And then, don't be afraid if you actually have an idea that you could commercialize, that going through that process is a lot of fun too. I mean, learning a new skill set, and if it is successful, it's another really good way to fund your science. It diversifies your revenue stream coming into your lab. So, think about if there is potential impact doing a program like something like AICore. And then always start with why. Why do you get up every day? Why are you taking on this research project? Why is this relevant? And let that drive the rest. All right, so that's it for me. Do you guys have questions, comments?
We don't really talk about patents and as a type of commercialization of science. Is that something that CCTS is helping?
Absolutely. So here at UAB, the CCTS, we do panels. We also do something called iPanels. And so that's innovation panels. If you have an idea and you want to know how to protect your idea, we actually assemble a group of people who are experts in that for you. Another entity we have here at UAB is called the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. They have the Technology Transfer Office, and they'll be able to walk you through the process. So protecting your ideas is essential. And so having an understanding of this, are they getting a session on IP? But you have to talk to us before you submit the abstract or present it. Because once you present an idea in a public forum, and this could even be considered a public forum, then we can no longer protect it. So the first thing you have to do is come talk to us, and then we'll be able to see if it's worth protecting. Very good point. All right, so you have your project descriptions. Do you think you could come up with, who is my customer, what is my product or service, and why do they care?
I think that the why question is challenging because you may have a very clinically significant question, but patients don't care about it. So how do you sell that to patients and get them to buy into the research and commit time and really participate? So that's I think always a struggle with. You may do some patient-centered research that is relevant to them, but
you can't.
Doesn't, help advance the.
So this is the so it comes back to this idea of what makes successful organizations. The ones that actually have a customer base that buy into their purpose. So, if you have experiments and it's solving a problem that patients don't care about, they're not going to follow through, period.
So who's the customer here? Are we trying to sell it to the funding agency or to patients? So, it's relevant to them.
So, which is a really good point. All right, so going back to, all right, why to get an NIH, or actually what, my research, how I designed this experiment and actually get somebody to review it with a good score. Why? So I can keep my lab funded. And that is typically the mindset that we have, which is why a lot of the science that we do will never leave this campus. And so, in my opinion, getting NIH funding is a key activity. We have to do that. But that's not connecting to the beneficiary of the science that we're actually going to do. And, by the way, Your grants are going to be so much more compelling if you can say, I'm working on this problem, and I've talked to 50 patients, and they say it's a really big problem. So can you actually go out and pre-sell people to participate in your experiment before you even submit it? Because then you know I'm working on something that matters.
I'm probably the only social behavioral scientist in here. Is it possible she can talk to the actual patients? You know?
Oh my gosh,
Just
yes!
go out and talk and ask. Even before I decided on my dissertation topic, my first dissertation chair wanted me to study what he studied. I wasn't interested. And I told him I had to go to the community that I live in and ask the people that I want to work with. And I fired him and got somebody who understood what I was trying to do. And I studied what I was informed by community members to study. So it was diabetes that they cared about. They didn't care about Agnes's model for healthcare utilization. They wanted to manage their diabetes better here in Alabama. So I fired him and hired somebody else. So talk to people.
I think one of the challenges, for example, what I study is physical function in patients with rheumatoid arthritis. We know that's important, and has a lot of consequences. But people are not necessarily interested in exercising. So how do you get them to buy into it? Right? But we need more research into that.
I did some more research, but the first thing I did was I conducted 27 interviews at the VA with my idea, just independent one-on-one with the veteran population I was trying to reach. And I asked them their opinion. I said, look, I have this sort of idea, but I'm not sure it's going to fly. Tell me what you think about it. I went to them first. Well, they came to the VA. And then I went to the next step. I had to ask. Because one, I'm not 65. My physical function is pretty good. I'm an endurance athlete. So, what do I know? I'm a veteran, but I'm not in their shoes. I had to ask them first. I came to the table. I didn't have any assumptions.
Jane, can you ask them to mute?
I have.
Okay.
So, that's the part of being a social behavioral scientist that I think as that basic scientists may not understand.
And this is really such a critical point because our mentors are not teaching us how to think about the why and the real impact. What we're learning is how do we get the next grant? We become experts at, talking to the audience at NIH. And once again, that is perfectly fine. That's probably what 80% of the science we do on this campus is. But in order to really translate science and have an impact on people with rheumatoid arthritis, you have to come up with something that they actually will do. And so, people just won't do some things. And so if the perfect protocol is for me to eat a healthy diet, exercise every day, and lift weights, it may happen some of the time. So this idea of what is something that a patient can commit to, and how do we form habits around that? And so, but they've got to be willing to change. So how many of you guys know you should change a bad behavior? Oh, I got a few. Absolutely. I know I need to go to the gym. I know I need to quit drinking beer. I know these things. However, the value proposition, so once again, my rational brain tells me, okay, you're going to get to the gym today. But my emotional brain is like, oh, long day. Let's go to the pub. Or it's basketball season. Let's figure this out. So, but you can commit to some things. So what is it that people care enough about to kick them out of the status quo? And that's the real key. That's the value proposition. And, but it is really difficult. You have to get out of your lab and really understand, have empathy with the people with the problem you're trying to solve. So I have a really good example from one of the AICore teams, actually. It was fascinating. So these guys were the ones that created a breathing machine for premature babies. So they saw these little premature babies, and they had this kind of breathing mask on. It was all taped and rubber banded. And the little baby just looks like it's in so much pain. It was awful. And so they created a device that was streamlined, very small, and it was incredibly successful. But the preemie baby market is not very good, right? So they're like, this technology would be perfect for people with CPAP machines, right? Because it's smaller, it's much more comfortable, it's quiet. And so they got the fastest FDA approval in history because they had already gotten it for use with premature babies. And so they already started buying their boats, right? And planning their vacations because they were going to be billionaires. Guess what? Took it to market, fancy packaging, it was prescribed.
Failed?
It failed horribly. Why?
They didn't care.
The patients didn't care. So the 20% of the patients that are suffering enough will do anything. They don't care. They'll have their CPAP machine on and they'll use it. The other 80% just didn't want crap on their face. And they weren't in enough pain to actually sleep with something. And so, but because they didn't actually go out and talk to their users to see, that they just assumed something, lighter, more comfortable would make a difference, and it had zero impact. Huge failure. And once again, this is why, knowing people on different areas of the spectrum makes a huge difference. So who can you talk to or meet that will take you out to the VA or take you out to the populations of interest and actually so you can sit and talk to them? It's really, really worth it. Actually, another scientist I was talking to, fabulous. She was great, hugely successful. And she does cancer research in mice. And so, she grows tumors and see how they develop and see what types of therapies actually work. She has never seen a person with the tumor. Never. She has never shadowed a doctor to actually see what patients with that kind of cancer actually are like. So I was like, what a great opportunity. Go meet the people that you're trying to help, and it will make it much more compelling. All right, so your homework, you have two things.
There's a question online. They were asking if the sabbaticals were also open to partners, and yes, they are.
Absolutely they are.
And also there was another question that said, can you recommend a sabbatical in an area of translational science?
Yes, we can. So all you need to do is go to the website, go to Research Commons, and then put in the request, and we will follow up with you. Actually, I would love to get, you want a really good sabbatical, go see Lucio. Come spend time with somebody who really has these characteristics. Another really good opportunity is the ACTS Translational Science Conference. Are any of you guys going to that in a couple of weeks? So every year about this time, actually in 2 weeks, so about April 20th in Washington, D.C., we have a national conference called the Translational Conference. And people just like you from all over the country, from CTSAs, go and present their research, attend workshops, and just network. One of the funnest things about this event is we actually have a dinner happy hour for everybody who comes from our entire partner network. So it's a really good informal way to meet other people. So it's too late this year, but certainly think about it for next year. Getting yourself out there. So homework. You're going to actually connect with your teams and start working on your projects. Okay? You're going to start with your team and seriously think about why are you tackling the problem, how are you going to do it, and what are you actually going to do. The second thing you're going to do is take that research description that you gave to Jean that is in your Excel spreadsheet and see if you can come up with a value proposition. Who is my customer or beneficiary? What is my product or outcome or innovation? And then why do they care? Those two things alone will help advance your science and your thinking about it more than probably anything you can do. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. I appreciate the time. Oh my God! I don't recognize you at all. You
Great
look
presentation.
fabulous.
Thank you. And the kids. Really good.
Yeah, we'll have to have another.
What about is he staying out?
My sister
Big dog's like, okay, this is my space. She's like,
Oh, that's
So tell me about the researcher.
I'm not contact. I try to help older veterans feel better. That's all I do. Once we have training video, it's actually exercise intervention, but I just saw it as helping them feel better about themselves. I'm just, and first with interviews, I just wanted to ask them because I know that this is I can't tell somebody who's 75 5 or 6 things wrong with them to get out and exercise, especially in Birmingham. Go walk and get shot. So I have a DVD that's program that comes on television to stay on, so it doesn't cost them any additional money after the week. So any of the school, they can buy it at the movie shop. But and face to face and I want to go out 27 minutes, they all pay taxes, and they love 99.9 for those who it's been pushing and found out their overall health. That was better about themselves. They would play with their brain. I did a mixed method, sequential, quantitative, qualitative. They do better about themselves. They get stronger. They lost some weight. They just feel better. And all my guys have PTSD, depression, hypertension, diabetes, just so many illnesses, medications. How can they make it better?
So how would make this experience better?
Oh, they didn't have it in the focus groups. I didn't do that because I'll be totally biased. Right now, you said it was at and it was 65 to 81 years old. They hated to use it, but it's not that I can use it. So they didn't have to put their work away around it. They would play music in the background instead of they didn't like the paint, but I didn't like how much banana. You just don't jump up and take the weights away. So they
rather than stepping in.
do it from there until it hurts. It's about repetition, being able to complete the exercise. But what else? They didn't like the resistance band. I gave them the right bands, so I bumped it up to the next level of band. They hated was a ball for their back because all of them were jumping and playing the team. Great thing, but when you're 75, it hurts. So the ball was too big, so I dropped the size of the ball down. Because when you guys went out and dropped the smaller ball, you know, so I changed the size of the ball.
And when you go back there and you're doing, and you add it through, you just take these little increments of stuff and add on together so they're final working on.
Exactly. Especially when you know initially have research support.
Separate
Yes, gave me money for phase
and it just
one.
picks whatever one was
And
started merging to, which for me was the
yeah, and they helped me
and that's when I
reduce
started deciding
what they were
it's
transfer.
possible.
We made it into those from
Before you ever
the first study.
have you tried format citations?
Well, I'm not really, I don't think, I always skip over and I always go for the research part.
You know what I did? I'm we're not doing like, I put each message and then I have to go back and research, set up all.
No, you just unformat too, because there's something just
Well,
you don't have to
what's
wait
interesting
when
about
you just click reformat.
I'm into the population studies.
Okay, did they just have black coffee and then you were?
I don't know, I
And
just
then
had
you
to
factor
figure
in
out.
the exercise.
There's definitely, I mean, I really don't
So,
know.
So I'm adding white residents
We've done it last
so in our,
we take,
so that's what
so
we
I had to go through and do all that, and then I was like, wait, this is, I can't end up, I can't file this.
Yeah.
I tried to go with certain where when you don't want to do something, you have to unlearn and read that.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing, and I advised me to short writing because I was
Typing out.
all I know is about quality of life. I don't have this fascination with this person. So I had PT, MD was physical therapist. And then when she's a judge, you can like say right now, I had her. I had my main mentor, right? I had it was a crazy team. I had a physiologist doesn't study over the does physical therapy and research and mixture neurobehavioral science. So I had this great team because that's what social workers do. We reach out across and then I had a faculty behavior scientist. So I had to finish, this is one of the things on the first round, it was just like, well, you do every time you sit, you update and just picked it up and just check it. Dr. Ball, that's my cognitive behavioral science, so I will introduce MRIs, functional MRIs, and see if it's doing anything to the white and gray matter. Because it's fading with the benefits. So, Robin Moore was now mentioned, just got this multi corner.
I just leave it.
So that's, so then I was just like,
They make adjustments or something, like it might be, I just like,
that's why I need to speak.
Virtually, they can't do
Basic.
Then
Cut.
Yeah.
It's this team is too big. I would advise her to only have what is necessary. But I'm thinking, and this is necessary because I don't know. So now I'm reading science books.
submit it just
Good. I bought, Dr. Baldwin's for dummies. It is hilarious, but, you know, my undergrad is like, how's your homework? Hey, that fun stuff. You know, when I teach human behavior, I just go on the textbook. You know, I Google how to pronounce the word because
I did that now. Usually I just fix it the last time and then save it and it's always.
yeah, and then I'm in this, and they wanted to see me on a translational science program. I basically taught myself Translational
Well,
Science.
I was thinking
And so what I did is
it's
a short crowd, I didn't know I was doing it. So I'm in this,
I
and
just
I also
know
applied
that issue in the future.
one that's specifically for behavioral scientists in the summer. So I'm still
And
waiting.
then, I was like,
This is, I got 30 in that last year, and not hurt, and like, this is not gonna hurt.
it's true.
I just listened to someone who was
We'll have a new record, there's a new record sheet. I had 3 records.
in nursing. She told me about this exercise program that she did with me over 65. She said, you should watch it. And then that's how I got the idea. And
Knowledge transfer, boundaries.
I went to the database. And I was like, look, I have this idea.
Well, and
You know, I'm not 65. I have no idea what it is to walk in shoes. But I need you to just be honest with me and tell me, would you even consider something like this?